Her human husband was gentle and helpless, until the alarm tore through our quarters before my eyes had even opened, a deep red pulse bouncing off the walls of our small station apartment. I sat up fast, my claws already out before my mind caught up with my body. Daniel was already standing, calm, pulling on his boots like the world wasn't ending. That calmness used to embarrass me. Now, looking back, I think it should have warned me. My name is Lyra Vache, and 3 months ago I was given to a human named Daniel Hale as part of the Cathari-Terran trade accord. I did not choose him. My family chose him, the way my family chose everything in my life, because a marriage between a Cathari noble daughter and a human soldier-turned-diplomat would smooth the edges of a treaty nobody on my side actually wanted to sign. When they first showed me his picture, I laughed. Not cruelly, just honestly. He looked soft, pale skin, no claws, no spines, no fangs worth mentioning, a face built for apologizing. My sisters joked that I had been given a pet instead of a husband, and for a long time, I believed them. The alarm kept screaming. Through the thin wall of our cabin, I heard boots running in the corridor outside, voices shouting in 3 different languages at once. Station Veraco sat on the edge of contested space, a trade post built to keep 3 empires from clawing each other apart over a strip of unclaimed stars. It was supposed to be safe. It was supposed to be boring. "Stay close to me," Daniel said. His voice didn't shake. It never shook, even when mine did. I wanted to ask him why he wasn't afraid. I wanted to ask him a lot of things in those first months, and most of the time, he just smiled that gentle, useless smile and changed the subject. I used to think it was because he had nothing interesting to say. Humans, after all, were the galaxy's newest children, barely a century out of their own wars, kept around, mostly because they were cheap to feed and easy to underestimate. I had underestimated him every single day since the wedding. He couldn't lift the stone furniture in our quarters without help. He turned pale at the sight of properly prepared meat, the kind every Cathari household serves with pride, still glistening from the hunt. He slept with a small light on, something he never explained and I never asked about, assuming it was some embarrassing human fear of the dark. When the station's gravity flickered during testing drills, he grabbed the wall like the rest of the soft-bodied civilians, while I barely noticed the shift under my own feet. I had written letters to my sisters describing him. I am ashamed of those letters now. I called him fragile. I called him a burden dressed up as a husband. I told them the rumors about humans being dangerous, the old stories about the wars they fought against their own kind before they ever reached the stars, must have been exaggerated, because the man sharing my bed could not even open a sealed ration pack without asking for help. The alarm cut off. The silence after it was worse. "Reaper signature," Daniel said quietly, reading something off the small device strapped to his wrist, a device I had never paid attention to before. "Confirmed. 3 ships. They're not supposed to be out here." I felt the blood drain from my face. Every species in this part of the galaxy knew that name. Void Reapers did not negotiate, did not trade, did not take prisoners for ransom in any way that ended well for the prisoners. They came, they took what they wanted, and they left nothing behind that could tell the story. "How do you know that?" I asked. He didn't answer. He was already moving, pulling a case out from under our bed that I had never once seen him open. I had assumed it held old human keepsakes, sentimental things from a homeworld he rarely spoke of. I was wrong about that too. Outside, the corridor lights shifted from red to a deeper, pulsing crimson, the station's highest alert. Through the small viewport in our cabin wall, I caught a glimpse of something massive sliding past the stars, dark and angular, swallowing the light around it instead of reflecting it. My hearts, both of them, were pounding. "Lyra," Daniel said, and for the first time since I had met him, his voice carried a weight I did not recognize, not fear, something colder and steadier than fear. "I need you to listen to me carefully, and I need you to trust me, even if nothing I say makes sense right now." I nodded, because what else could I do? The station around us was screaming with sirens, and the soft, helpless man I had spent 3 months quietly pitying was looking at me like he already knew exactly how this night was going to go. "Whatever happens," he said, "stay near me, not because I need protecting, because I don't want you out of my sight." I should have asked him what he meant. I should have asked him 100 things in that moment, but the lights died completely, plunging our cabin into a darkness so total I could not see my own hand in front of my face. And somewhere far below us, through layers of metal and stone, I heard the unmistakable sound of something enormous, tearing through the station's outer hull. The Reapers had arrived, and the galaxy's nightmare had just walked through my front door. In the dark, I heard Daniel breathe out, slow and even, the way I imagined a man might breathe before stepping into cold water he had swum in 1,000 times before. I had spent 3 months believing my husband was the weakest creature I had ever shared a bed with. I was about to learn exactly how wrong I had been, and there would be no gentle way to learn it. The dark lasted only a few seconds before the emergency lights kicked in, dim amber strips along the floor that turned every shadow into something with teeth. Daniel pulled me down by the shoulder, low and fast, and I realized he was not panicking. He was positioning me, the way a person moves furniture they have already measured 100 times in their head. "Down here," he said, guiding me behind the stone bench bolted to our cabin wall. "Don't move until I tell you to." I had questions stacked up behind my teeth, but the station shook again, harder this time, and somewhere 2 decks below us I heard something that sounded horribly like screaming, cut off too quickly to be anything good. My claws dug into the stone bench without my permission. I am not a small creature. Cathari women are bred for strength, for the hunt, for standing our ground when lesser species run, and still, in that moment, I felt like a child hiding from a storm. Daniel knelt beside the case he had pulled from under our bed. When he opened it, I expected human medical supplies, maybe a personal device, something soft and ordinary to match the man I thought I had married. Instead, the case held equipment I did not recognize. Dark matte plating, a folded harness, something that looked uncomfortably like a weapon built for a hand far steadier than I had ever seen him use. "You kept this hidden," I said, my voice tighter than I wanted it to be. "I kept a lot of things," he answered, not unkindly, fastening the harness across his chest with the same practiced motion he used every morning to button his uniform jacket for diplomatic meetings. "I'm sorry. There wasn't a good time to explain, and I didn't want this part of my life anywhere near you. I still don't, but it's already here, so we're going to deal with it." Footsteps pounded down the corridor outside our cabin. Too many, too fast, not the rhythm of station security. The door panel beside us let out a sharp electronic whine, and then went dark, the lock disengaging on its own. "They're cutting power to the security doors," Daniel said. "Smart. Means they know the station layout. Means this wasn't random." "How would Reapers know our layout? Nobody negotiates with Reapers. Nobody survives long enough to draw them a map." He didn't answer that either, and for the first time, a small, cold thread of suspicion wound itself through my fear. I did not have time to follow it, because the door to our cabin tore open from the outside. Not slid, not unlocked, torn, metal screeching against metal, and 3 figures filled the frame. I had seen pictures of Void Reapers in briefings, grainy images recovered from destroyed colonies, but pictures had not prepared me for the reality of them standing in my own doorway. Tall, segmented armor, the color of old rust, faces hidden behind masks, built more for intimidation than protection, each one carrying a weapon, clearly meant for crowds rather than precision. Daniel stood up slowly, hands open, placing himself directly between me and the doorway. "We are looking for the human asset," one of the Reapers said, its translator voice flat and mechanical, scraping every warmth out of the words. "Designation: Hail Daniel. Diplomatic registry confirms residence on this deck." My heart stopped. They were not here for the station. They were not here for trade routes or supply caches or any of the things Reapers usually tore apart for profit. They were here for him. "You found him," Daniel said, his voice still calm, still steady, the same voice he used to ask me how my day had gone. "Congratulations. Now you have a choice to make." The Reaper in front laughed, a harsh broken sound through the translator. The soft one jokes. "We were told humans were sentimental, predictable. The female comes with us as leverage, in case the asset decides to be difficult." Before I could even open my mouth to argue, 2 of them moved toward me at once, fast, far faster than I expected from creatures wrapped in that much armor. Daniel did not shout. He did not threaten. He simply stepped sideways, one motion, almost lazy, and the lead Reaper's outstretched arm met something it clearly had not planned for, because the creature folded sideways into the doorframe with a sound like a sack of stones dropped from a height. For one full second, nobody in that room moved, including me. "Lyra," Daniel said quietly, not even looking at me, his eyes fixed on the two remaining Reapers, now reassessing the soft, helpless human standing in front of them. "Stay behind the bench." I mean it this time. I did not understand what I had just seen. I had spent 3 months convinced that this man could barely carry a crate of supplies without help, and he had just put an armored Reaper soldier on the ground without appearing to try very hard at all. The remaining 2 Reapers raised their weapons, and the calm, gentle husband I had quietly pitied for 3 months exhaled slowly, the exact same breath I had heard him take before stepping into the dark a few minutes earlier, and moved. I will not pretend I understood, in that instant, everything I was watching. I only knew that the things I had believed about him, the soft hands, the careful apologies, the fear of the dark I had assumed was childish, none of it matched what unfolded in the next handful of seconds, and that somewhere underneath all of it, I had been living beside a man I did not actually know at all. One Reaper fired, a wide pulse of energy meant to fill the small room and leave nothing standing. Daniel was no longer where the shot landed. He had already closed the distance, and the weapon meant for crowds met empty air while he redirected the second Reaper's arm with a motion too quick and too precise for me to fully follow, turning the creature's own momentum back against it. I had grown up surrounded by warriors. My own father led hunts that killed creatures 3 times his size. I knew, on some level, what trained violence was supposed to look like, the noise of it, the effort, the display. What Daniel did carried none of that. It was quiet. It was almost gentle, in its own terrible way, the same economy of motion he used to fold laundry or pour my morning drink, except now it was breaking bone and ending threats with the same calm patience. The third Reaper, the one he had dropped first, began to stir, reaching for a weapon at its side. Daniel saw it without looking, somehow, and crossed the small room in 2 steps. I closed my eyes, not because I could not bear to watch, but because some old instinct told me that whatever happened in the next moment was not mine to see, that it belonged to a part of him he had spent our entire marriage keeping locked away from me. When I opened them again, the room was silent except for Daniel's breathing, still steady, still slow, like none of this had cost him anything at all. All 3 Reapers were down, not dead. I would learn later that he had been careful about that, careful in a way that told me even his violence followed rules I did not yet understand, but down, and no longer a threat to either of us. He turned to me then, and for just a moment, the calm cracked, and I saw something underneath it that looked almost like fear, the first real fear I had ever seen on his face since I had met him. "Are you hurt?" he asked, crossing the room to kneel in front of me, hands hovering like he wanted to check every inch of me, and was afraid to actually touch in case he had missed something. "No," I managed. My voice came out smaller than I wanted it to. "Daniel." "What are you?" He sat back on his heels, and for a long moment he said nothing, the sound of distant fighting still echoing somewhere through the station's corridors, reminding us both that whatever this was, it was far from finished. "I used to be a soldier," he said finally. "A long time ago, before the treaty, before you. I told myself that part of my life was over the day I came here, and I meant it, Lyra. I never wanted you to see this side of me. I wanted to be the husband who was safe to come home to, not the man I used to be. You let me believe you were helpless," I said, and I was surprised to hear that what colored my voice was not anger, not yet, but something closer to grief. For all the months I had spent quietly looking down on a man who had simply chosen, every single day, not to show me what he was capable of. "I let you believe I was gentle," he corrected softly. "That part was never a lie." Outside, the fighting grew louder, closer, and the brief stillness of our cabin would not last much longer. Whatever the Reapers wanted with him, whatever name and registry they had spoken at our door, this was only the beginning of a night that was about to demand far more from both of us than either of us had been ready to give. He stood, offering me his hand, and for the first time since the alarm had torn me out of sleep, I took it without hesitation, because the man holding it had just shown me, in the space of a few terrible seconds, that everything I thought I knew about him had only ever been half the truth. We moved through the corridor outside our cabin with the 3 downed reapers behind us, and I understood almost immediately that the night was far from over. Smoke drifted along the ceiling vents, thick and acrid, and somewhere above us the station's structural alarms had shifted from a steady pulse to a broken, stuttering wail that meant something critical had already failed. Daniel kept me slightly behind him, not because he doubted my strength, I realized now, but because he had already decided he would rather absorb the first strike of anything we met than let it reach me. It was a strange thing to notice in the middle of chaos, how careful his positioning was, how every step he took seemed to be calculating angles and exits at the same time. "They asked for you by name," I said, keeping my voice low as we reached a junction in the corridor. "Reapers don't operate like that. They take what's valuable and leave. They don't hunt specific people." "No," he agreed. "They don't. Which means somebody told them where to find me, and somebody told them what I used to be worth." A door at the end of the corridor hissed open before either of us reached it, and Station Security Director Owen Pratt stumbled through, blood on his sleeve, eyes wide with the particular kind of fear that came from seeing something you had spent your whole career assuming would never actually happen to you. "Hail," he gasped, leaning against the wall. "Thank every star you're alive. They've taken the lower docking ring. Civilians are trapped in the market level, and they're not killing anyone yet. They're hurting people, like they're looking for something. Or someone," Daniel said quietly. Owen's eyes flicked to me, then back to Daniel, and something in his expression shifted, guilt dressed up as exhaustion. "There's something you should know. The trade manifest filed for this docking cycle, the one that triggered Reaper interest in this sector, it wasn't random cargo. It was flagged under your old service designation. Somebody pulled your file from the archive 3 days ago and routed a copy through an unsecured channel." I watched Daniel go very still, the way a predator goes still, right before it decides whether something is worth the energy of a chase. "Who?" he asked, and his voice had lost every trace of softness now, every careful gentleness I had spent 3 months mistaking for weakness. "I don't know," Owen said. "I swear I don't know. The request came through diplomatic channels, which means it had clearance from someone on the Cathari side of the accord." The silence that followed felt heavier than the smoke pressing down from the ceiling vents. I felt the weight of every eye in that corridor land on me, not with suspicion exactly, but with the question hanging unspoken in the air between us. My family had arranged this marriage. My family had access to diplomatic channels. My family had never once tried to hide how little they thought of the alliance they had forced me into. "It wasn't me," I said, too quickly, my voice cracking under the accusation nobody had actually spoken aloud. Daniel turned to look at me, and whatever doubt might have flickered behind his eyes for half a second disappeared the moment he saw my face. "I know," he said simply. "I'm not asking you. I'm asking who else had access to my file, and a reason to want me removed from this station." I thought of my eldest sister, Kessa, who had argued loudest against the treaty, who had called this marriage an embarrassment to our bloodline in front of the entire family council. I thought of my father, who had signed the agreement only because refusing it would have cost the family more than his pride could bear, and who had never once forgiven the cost. "My family didn't want this marriage," I said slowly, forcing the words out even though they tasted like betrayal in my own mouth. Some of them would have been glad to see it fail. I don't know if any of them would go as far as this, but I can't promise you they wouldn't. Daniel didn't answer right away. He turned to Owen instead. "How many civilians are trapped in the market level?" 40, maybe 50? Families mostly. They evacuated the upper decks first, but the Reapers cut off the lower ring before anyone could reach it. "And the 3 ships outside? 2 are holding position. 1 docked directly into the lower ring, which means whatever they're looking for, they expect to find it down there, or they're using the market level as a staging point to draw it out." Daniel exhaled slowly, and I recognized the breath now, the same steady, deliberate exhale he had taken before stepping into the dark of our cabin, before crossing the room to put 3 armored soldiers on the ground without raising his voice once. "They want me to come to them," he said, "which means the fastest way to end this without losing those 50 civilians is to let them think it's working." "Absolutely not," I said, the words out of my mouth before I had even finished deciding to say them. 3 months of believing this man was fragile had collapsed in the space of one fight, but the fear underneath it, the fear of losing him, now that I finally understood what I actually had, was sharper than anything I had felt before in my life. You don't know what they want you for. You don't know if this is even about leverage anymore. I have a fairly good idea, he said, and something dark passed behind his eyes, old and tired, in a way that made him look, for just a moment, far older than I had ever seen him look. There's only one reason Reapers would pull a flagged service file and cross-reference it against a diplomatic registry, instead of just raiding the station for supplies like they usually do. Somebody told them what unit I used to belong to. What unit? I asked, even though some instinct told me I might not want the answer. The kind that doesn't exist on any public record, he said quietly. The kind Reapers have spent the last several years trying to find a way to neutralize, because every operation they've lost in the last decade traces back to people like me. Owen's face had gone pale, the kind of pale that came from a man realizing he had been standing next to something far more dangerous than he understood, for far longer than was comfortable. You're saying this isn't a raid, this is a hunt. I'm saying it became one the moment somebody handed them my name, Daniel said. A distant tremor ran through the deck plating beneath our feet, followed by the unmistakable groan of metal stress, somewhere below us. Something large enough to matter had just shifted its weight. The lower ring, I realized, was no longer simply occupied. It was being torn apart, deliberately, methodically, the way someone searches a house they intend to burn down afterward regardless of what they find. There's a maintenance access 2 decks down, Owen offered, voice steadying now that he had something useful to contribute. It runs along the old construction shaft, bypasses most of the market-level checkpoints. If you're determined to do something reckless, it's faster than going through the front. Daniel nodded, already moving, and I fell into step beside him, without being asked, because whatever fear lived in my chest now, it was no longer fear of him. It was fear for him, and that distinction changed everything about how I intended to spend the rest of this night. You're not going alone, I said, matching his pace down the corridor. Lyra. I am a noble daughter of the Cathari Dominion, I said, and for the first time since the alarms had torn through our cabin, I let the old steel my family had bred into me rise back to the surface, the steel I had buried under 3 months of misplaced pity for a man who had never needed my protection in the first place. I have killed things larger and angrier than every Reaper currently aboard this station. If you are walking into a hunt built to draw you out, you are not walking into it without someone watching your back. For a moment, something in his expression softened. Not weakness this time, but something gentler underneath the soldier I had just discovered living beneath my husband's careful, ordinary smile. All right, he said. Stay close. And Lyra, whatever you see down there, whatever I have to do to get those people out alive, I need you to trust that the man you married is still in here somewhere. I thought of the way he had stepped between me and 3 armed Reapers without a single moment of hesitation, the way his hands had hovered over me afterward, checking for injuries he was almost afraid to find, the gentleness that had never once been a lie, only ever a choice. I already know that, I said. I just spent 3 months not believing it was true. The maintenance hatch hissed open under Owen's override, revealing a narrow shaft lit by emergency strips that flickered erratically as the station's power grid continued to fail around us. Somewhere below, through layer after layer of metal, I could hear the muffled sound of voices, frightened, pleading, the 50 civilians trapped at the center of whatever hunt had been set in motion the moment somebody on my own side of this alliance decided my husband was worth more dead than the peace he had been sent here to protect. Daniel dropped into the shaft first, reaching back to steady me as I followed, and as the hatch sealed shut above us, cutting off the last of the corridor light, I understood that whatever happened in the next hour would decide far more than just our survival. It would decide whether the fragile peace between our 2 species, built on a marriage I had once considered nothing more than a political insult, was worth saving at all. The shaft dropped us into a service corridor that ran beneath the market level, lined with pipes and old wiring that hummed faintly under the failing power grid. Daniel moved through it like he had memorized the layout years ago, even though this was his first time aboard Station Vera Co, and I realized that this too was part of him. The part that read a room, a corridor, a battlefield, the way I read the weather before a hunt. Stay 3 steps behind me, he whispered. Not because I doubt you, because if something comes from the front, I want to be the first thing it meets. We reached a grate overlooking the lower market level, and through the gaps, I finally saw what 50 trapped civilians looked like under Reaper guard. Families pressed together against the far wall, station workers in torn uniforms, an elderly Cathari merchant shielding 2 human children who could not have been older than 10, all of them held in place by 4 armored Reapers positioned around the open floor like they were waiting for something. "They're not searching anymore," Daniel murmured. "They're waiting, which means they already know I'm coming." As if summoned by the words, a 5th figure stepped into the market level from the docking corridor beyond, taller than the others, armor darker, unmarked by the rust-colored plating the rest wore. The translator voice that followed was different too, slower, almost amused. "Daniel Hale," the figure said, the name carrying easily across the open floor. "Or should I use the designation your old command used? Ghost 6. It took considerable effort to confirm you were still alive, let alone hiding inside a diplomatic marriage on a border station. Nobody important bothers to visit." I felt Daniel go rigid beside me, not with fear, but with something colder, the recognition of a name from a life he had buried so deeply, he had never spoken it to me even once in 3 months of marriage. "You have 50 people down there who have nothing to do with whatever grudge you're carrying," Daniel called out, stepping toward a maintenance ladder that would bring him down onto the market floor. I grabbed his arm before he could move, and he paused just long enough to look at me, something steady and certain in his eyes that asked me, without words, to trust him one more time. "Let them go," he continued, raising his voice. "I'm here. That's what you wanted." The lead Reaper laughed, the sound scraping through the translator. "Half right. We wanted you, yes. Confirmation that the unit responsible for dismantling 6 of our deep raid operations over the last 4 years was not, in fact, some myth invented to frighten new recruits. But letting the witnesses go was never part of the arrangement. Then we have a problem," Daniel said, and dropped down the ladder onto the open floor before I could stop him. I followed, claws extended, every instinct in my body screaming to close the distance and put myself between him and the weapons now turning his way. But he raised one hand without looking back, a small, precise gesture that somehow carried the full weight of a command. Wait. I hated it. I obeyed it anyway, because 3 months of underestimating him had taught me, finally and completely, that whatever plan existed behind his calm, steady eyes was built on more experience than I could match in a single night. "You've been planning this a long time," Daniel said, walking slowly toward the center of the floor, hands open and visible, the posture of a man surrendering, that I now understood was nothing of the kind. Pulling my file, finding someone willing to leak it through diplomatic channels. "That's not impulse, that's patience. Patience is the only weapon that works against your kind," the lead Reaper said. "Direct assaults failed. 6 operations, 6 failures, 6 teams that should have succeeded against ordinary defenders, and instead met something far less ordinary. So we stopped attacking the defenses and started studying the defenders instead. Names, histories, weaknesses. It turns out, even Ghost 6 has one." The Reaper's masked head turned, deliberately, toward me. My heart stopped for the second time that night. "No," Daniel said, and for the first time since the alarms had woken us, real fear cracked through his voice, sharp and unguarded. "She has nothing to do with this. She has everything to do with this," the Reaper said. "A marriage of convenience, built to anchor a peace nobody on either side particularly wanted. It made you predictable, Hale. It made you findable. And now it makes you compliant. Because we both know you will not let anything happen to her, even if it costs you everything you used to be." I understood, in that moment, exactly what kind of trap had been built around us. Not just tonight, but for months, possibly longer. A trap that used me as the bait, long before either of us had even met. "Then you've made a mistake," I said, stepping forward despite every silent command Daniel had given me to stay back. "Because you assume I am the weakness in this marriage. You assume the soft one is the only one capable of violence." The lead Reaper's masked head tilted, something between curiosity and dismissal in the gesture. "Cathari nobility. Bred for the hunt. Yes, I am aware of your species' reputation. It changes nothing. You are still leverage, regardless of how sharp your claws are." Then test that assumption, I said, and let 3 months of buried instinct rise to the surface at last. The same steel that had sat dormant under careful etiquette and arranged marriage and quiet, misplaced pity for a husband who had never once needed my protection. What happened next unfolded faster than I expected, faster than I think even Daniel expected, because the moment the lead Reaper gestured for its soldiers to move on me, I was already moving first, closing the distance before the order had even finished translating, claws meeting armor, with a force that sent the nearest soldier staggering backward into the wall behind it. Daniel did not hesitate either. Whatever restraint he had been holding on to, whatever careful gentleness he had built around himself for my sake over 3 months of marriage, fell away completely, the instant the Reapers turned their weapons toward me instead of him. I caught only fragments of it through the chaos, a blur of motion too precise to be panic, too economical to be rage, taking down one soldier after another with the same terrible calm he had shown in our cabin, except now there was nothing holding it back. The civilians pressed against the far wall began to scatter toward the corridor exits the moment the guards lost their formation, station workers pulling families along, the elderly merchant herding the 2 human children ahead of him with surprising speed for someone his age. I caught glimpses of Owen Pratt's security team finally arriving through the upper access points, weapons drawn, providing covering fire that gave the fleeing civilians the gap they needed. I fought my way toward Daniel through the breaking line of Reaper soldiers, claws and instinct carrying me through a fight I had trained for my entire life, but never actually needed until tonight, and found him locked in a struggle with the lead Reaper itself, the dark, unmarked armor, moving with a speed and skill that matched his own almost exactly. "You should have stayed hidden, Ghost 6, the lead Reaper said, voice strained now, the amusement gone from its translator. Comfort made you slow. Comfort made me something worth protecting, Daniel answered, and the next exchange between them moved too fast for me to follow clearly, a blur of strikes and redirected force, until finally Daniel caught the creature's weapon arm mid-swing and used its own momentum to drive it down hard against the market floor, pinning it there with a precision that left no room for it to recover. The remaining Reaper soldiers, seeing their commander down and their formation broken, retreated toward the docking corridor in a ragged scramble, abandoning whatever remained of their plan the moment it stopped working in their favor. Owen's security team moved to secure the floor, rounding up the soldiers who had not managed to flee, while Daniel knelt over the pinned commander, breathing hard for the first time all night. "Call off the other 2 ships," Daniel said. "Tell them the operation failed. Tell them whatever you want, but it ends now." The commander's masked head turned slightly, taking in the empty market floor, the fleeing soldiers, the security forces closing in, and something in its posture finally registered defeat. "This was supposed to end you," it said, voice flat. "Instead, you found a reason to be faster than you were before." "She wasn't a weakness," Daniel said quietly. "You built your entire plan on a mistake." I reached him then, breathing hard myself, claws still wet, my arranged marriage, and everything I had once believed about my soft, helpless human husband, lying in pieces around me on a market floor that had nearly become a graveyard. "Are you hurt?" he asked immediately, the same hovering hands, the same careful checking, even now, even after everything I had just watched him do. "No," I said, and found myself almost laughing despite the exhaustion and the adrenaline still burning through my blood. "I believe that question belongs to me tonight." He managed a tired smile, the first real one I had seen since the alarms tore us out of sleep. "I'm fine. We're fine. It's over." But as security finally secured the lead commander, and the last of the chaos settled into the slow, exhausted work of counting survivors, I understood that something far larger than tonight had just been uncovered, and somewhere on my own side of the alliance, someone with diplomatic clearance had been willing to risk 50 innocent lives just to remove a man they considered an inconvenient piece. That was not a problem that ended with one defeated raiding party. That was a problem that was only just beginning to surface. 3 days passed before the station's investigators traced the leaked file back to its source, and when the name finally surfaced, it was not my sister Kessa, and it was not my father, though both had motive enough to make the accusation believable. It was a junior aide in my father's diplomatic office, A man named Edric Voss, who had spent years resenting the trade accord for reasons that had nothing to do with family pride, and everything to do with old contracts he believed the treaty had quietly destroyed. He had sold the file for a price small enough to make the betrayal feel almost pathetic once it was laid out in full, a handful of mining rights on a moon nobody important had cared about until that moment. Daniel listened to the report in silence, sitting across from me in the same cabin where the alarms had first torn us out of sleep, the same stone bench I had hidden behind, while 3 reapers filled our doorway. The walls still bore the scorch marks from that night, a reminder neither of us had been in a hurry to repair. "It wasn't your family," he said quietly, watching my face for whatever relief or grief might surface there. "I wanted you to hear that from me directly, not from a report." "I know," I said, and found that the words carried less weight than I expected, because somewhere in the last 3 days, the fear of my own family's betrayal had been replaced by something far more complicated: the slow, careful work of understanding exactly who I had married. He had told me everything by then, not all at once, but in pieces, over long, quiet evenings while the station repaired itself around us. The unit he had served in before the treaty, the operations that didn't exist on any record, the years spent as something the galaxy was not supposed to know, humanity had become capable of producing. He told me why he had buried it so deeply when the diplomatic posting brought him here, not out of shame, but out of a quiet, stubborn hope that he might finally get to be something gentler than what his service had made him. "I wanted to be safe to come home to," he said again, the same words he had used the night of the attack, and this time I understood them completely. "I never wanted you to look at me the way the galaxy looks at people like me, like a weapon instead of a person. I looked at you like neither, for 3 months," I admitted, and the shame of it still sat heavy in my chest even now. "I looked at you like something fragile, something to be managed instead of trusted. I am sorry for that, Daniel. I judged you against every story I had ever heard about your species, and I never once stopped to actually see the man standing in front of me." He reached for my hand, careful as always, the same gentleness that had never once been a lie, even when it hid something far more dangerous underneath. "You're not the only one who carried assumptions into this marriage," he said. "I told myself the same story everyone else on this station told, that this was a political arrangement, nothing more, something to be endured politely until the treaty no longer needed us standing beside each other. I didn't expect to actually want to come home to you, Lyra. That part surprised me more than anything that happened in the market level. I thought of my sisters, who had pitied me for marrying a creature the galaxy considered soft and unimportant, who would soon hear the full account of what had happened aboard Station Vera Co., and would have to find some new story to tell themselves about the man I had married. I thought of my father, whose careful diplomatic distance from this marriage might finally shift now that the Cathari Dominion's high command had quietly begun revising its assessment of exactly what humanity's so-called fragile newcomers were capable of when provoked. Word of the attack had already spread through diplomatic channels, exaggerated and reshaped with each retelling, until the story of one human soldier defending a station against 3 Reaper raiding ships had become something closer to legend than fact. I did not correct the exaggerations when my sisters wrote to ask if the rumors were true. Some small, petty part of me enjoyed watching them recalculate everything they had once believed about my marriage. But the truth, the version only Daniel and I actually knew, was quieter than the legend, and in some ways more important. It was not the story of a hidden weapon finally unleashed. It was the story of a man who had spent every day of our marriage choosing gentleness over the violence he was fully capable of, choosing patience over the instincts his training had carved into him, choosing to be soft with me, even though softness had never once been forced upon him by anything other than his own will. That, I had come to understand, was a far rarer thing than strength. Any creature bred for the hunt could learn to fight. Far fewer could learn to lay that capability down willingly, every single morning, for the sake of someone they had chosen to protect instead of dominate. "What happens to Edric Voss?" I asked, though I suspected I already knew the answer. "Cathari justice, not mine," Daniel said. "Your father insisted on that personally. I think he wanted to prove something to you, after everything that happened, that he was willing to hold his own people accountable, even when it would have been easier to let human authorities handle it and avoid the embarrassment. It was, I realized, the closest thing to an apology my father had ever offered me, delivered through action instead of words. the way most things in my family were communicated. I did not know yet whether it would be enough to repair the quiet distance that had defined our relationship since the day he signed this marriage into existence, without asking whether I wanted it. But it was a beginning, and after everything else this week had cost us, I found myself willing to accept beginnings wherever they appeared. The Reaper commander captured during the attack had been transferred to a joint Cathari-Terran detention facility 3 systems away, along with the surviving soldiers from the raid. Daniel had been called to testify twice already, providing details about the operations his old unit had once run against Reaper raiding fleets. Details that apparently mattered a great deal to military analysts on both sides of the alliance, trying to understand exactly how badly the Reapers had underestimated what humanity had quietly built, and then chosen to hide. "They're going to want you back," I said one evening, watching him clean the equipment from the case he had once kept hidden beneath our bed, equipment that no longer needed hiding, now that the truth of who he had been was no longer a secret either of us could afford to keep. "Your old command, now that they know Ghost 6 is still alive and still capable, they can want whatever they like," he said, without looking up from his work. "I didn't survive that life by accident, Lyra. I survived it because I knew exactly when to stop, and I chose to stop the day I accepted this posting. Nothing that happened this week changes that choice. If anything, it confirmed it. Even though you're capable of more than anyone here realized?" He looked up at me then, and the smile that crossed his face was the same gentle, ordinary smile I had once mistaken for weakness, except now I understood every quiet, deliberate choice that lived underneath it. "Especially because of that," he said. "Anyone can be dangerous, Lyra. It takes nothing but the right training and the wrong day. The harder thing, the thing I actually had to work for, was learning how to be dangerous and still choose softness anyway. That's not weakness. I think it might be the only kind of strength actually worth having." Outside our cabin window, the repaired section of Station Vera Co's hull gleamed under the slow rotation of starlight, the scars of that night already fading beneath fresh plating, though I suspected the deeper scars, the ones in diplomatic relationships and family trust, and my own understanding of exactly who I had married, would take considerably longer to heal. I thought of the version of myself who had once written letters home, calling this man fragile, calling him a burden dressed up as a husband, certain that the galaxy's stories about humanity's soft, recently arrived newcomers had to be true simply because everyone around me repeated them so confidently. That version of me had been wrong about almost everything that mattered, and I found I did not mind the correction nearly as much as my pride might have predicted. The galaxy, I had learned, did not lose its claws just because it learned how to smile gently across a dinner table. It simply learned, better than almost anyone else, exactly when those claws needed to stay sheathed, and exactly what they were worth when they finally did not. I reached for Daniel's hand across the small space between us, the same hand that had pinned an armored Reaper commander to a market floor 3 nights ago, the same hand that had hovered over me afterward, checking gently for wounds that were never there, and understood, finally and completely, that I had not married someone helpless at all. I had married someone who had simply, deliberately, every single day, chosen to be gentle with me instead.